Chapter 20. The Unforgettable Week. By late July, I felt the itch to explore Hilo more deeply. On Monday, I called up Rob, and he said he'd be happy to host me Wednesday night, although he warned me that a small tropical depression was heading toward the island. I checked the radar, and it didn't look too bad. Although I didn't have a specific plan for my next Hilo trip, I hoped to finally make it up to Mauna Kea, the highest point on the island, but to do that, I would need help and a bit of luck. Tuesday turned out to be a warm-up for that unforgettable week. Johan and I planned to hike out onto the Kalapana lava field and find the Cave of Refuge, a hidden cave that opened up to a spectacular view of infinite ocean. We'd been talking about it for weeks, and I was glad that we finally had a concrete plan to go out and actually find it. He also asked me if it was okay if he brought a friend along. Of course, I said. Any friend of yours must be pretty cool. Later that morning, I arrived at the small complex of buildings known as Uncle Robert's, the same place that the night market was held every Wednesday evening. We waited for a few minutes for Johan's friend Skeeter to show up, and when he did, he handed Johan a small book, the same book that he'd been talking about ever since I'd met him. Wise Secrets of Aloha. Johan thanked Skeeter for returning it and said that I should borrow it next. Definitely, I said. You've told me so much about how you love it. I'll definitely read it. Awesome, he said. I'll give it to you when we get back from the hike. We began following a narrow red cinder trail that marked the fastest way over the lava rock to a small black sand beach that bordered the lava field. The beach might have been a good place to swim, except that its rip current was even worse than Kahena Beach. Still, it was a beautiful place to visit, and we stood on the black sand for a few minutes, enjoying the contrast of the white waves as they crashed against the smooth black stones that collected in patches around the beach. A short time later, we stepped back up to the shelf of black lava rock that rose about a meter above the beach and followed the edge of the island toward a small patch of greenery in the distance. Johan said that the entrance to the Cave of Refuge was within that green oasis. The only problem was, that was all we knew. None of us had ever been there before. All we knew were stories. Even so, we were determined to track the entrance down. How hard could it be? On a lava field, accurately judging distance can be tricky. And as we followed the sloping lava rock as it undulated upslope and downslope, the trees didn't seem to grow much closer. We talked to pass the time, eventually reaching the green area an hour later, a raised oasis of trees that the lava hadn't hit, called a kipuka. And then it took us a good while to find a decent path to climb up onto it. Once we got on the kipuka itself, I was surprised at how thick the bushes and trees grew, and we pushed our way through the thick undergrowth with white-hot determination. We would find the entrance, or at the very least, have a good story to tell later. And then I saw it. Below a layer of bushes, I noticed a hollow space. Excitement bubbled up within me, and I pushed the bushes aside, noticing a long crevice that reached down into the darkness. I followed it ahead, noticing that it grew wider the farther I went. Then it was wide enough that someone might be able to fit inside. Had I found it? Johan leaned over and stuck his head inside. Well, I asked, does it look like an entrance at all? He pulled his head back out from the thick undergrowth, furrowing his eyebrows. Sorry, I don't think so, man. It doesn't look like it goes anywhere. I sighed, hopelessness threatening me. We agreed that the real entrance would look more like a cave and less like a crevice. After all, every story we'd heard mentioned an actual cave entrance, not a crevice. We continued onward, soon reaching a boundary where the forest atop the kipuka was so thick that we couldn't penetrate it. Perhaps it was within the thicket? But how could we reach it? In the end, we headed back down, off of the kipuka to a small plateau that provided a good view of the waves crashing against the jet black boulders below. After the frustration of being unable to find the cave, I found the sound of the ocean waves soothing. More information would come to me, as it had a habit of doing, and when I knew more, I would return to this place and find it. By then, it was well past noon, and Johann and Skeeter were getting thirsty, so we began the trek back. Over an hour later, we reached the Kalapana Cafe and got some drinks, and I noticed a large, circular mural painted on the side of the building. A sea turtle, clownfish, rays, and coral were beautifully depicted, a huge volcano erupting behind them all. When we got back to the parking lot, Johann handed me a small book, bringing a smile to my face. "So this is it, huh?" I read the cover, which was dominated by a photo of a pink hibiscus flower. "Wise Secrets of Aloha. Learn and live the sacred art of Lomi Lomi." The book was surprisingly thin, only about 150 pages. I turned it over and read the description, which referred to the author, Harry Jim, as a kahuna of Lomi Lomi, keeper of the deep mysteries. It went on to describe Lomi Lomi as an ancient healing tradition, a set of 4 basic techniques that open us up to healing in the body and spirit. And as I would learn over the coming months, the concept of aloha was a key part of that healing too. I looked up to Johann. "Thank you. I can't wait to read it." "Of course," he smiled warmly back to me. "It's a really powerful book. I think you'll enjoy it." Carefully, I stowed the book in my brown day pack. Skeeter said that he had to get going and thanked us for a good hike. Well, we did our best. "See you later." He waved and drove away, and we walked over to the intersection where the road headed north again, toward Pahoa. "What do you want to do now?" Johann asked, the sun glinting off of his blonde hair. "I don't know. Is there anything else cool around here that's not too tricky to hitchhike to?" "Have you been to the Painted Church? It's pretty cool." "Actually, I've been meaning to go there," I said, feeling suddenly very aligned with this new idea. "Are we pretty close?" "Yeah, probably 20 minutes up the road." A smile spread across my face. "Let's check it out." It didn't take long for us to get a ride up to the church, a small, mint-colored building with a steep roof and a depiction of Christ on a cross high above the entrance. A painted sign beside the road read, "Star of the Sea, Painted Church. Mass this Friday, 4 p.m. We headed up the 5 concrete steps to 2 wide doors, painted in white trim, which had been left open. And as I stepped inside, thousands of details flooded into my eyes. True to its name, nearly every surface inside the church was lovingly painted. Above a lectern in the center, depictions of angels holding heavenly banners formed an arch over a carved representation of Christ, nailed to a wooden cross with the letters INRI painted above his head, an abbreviation of a Latin phrase which means Jesus the Nazarene, King of the Jews. More arches had been painted onto the wall behind the cross, creating a forced perspective effect that made the space behind the lectern seem to go on farther than it actually did. Nearby, I noticed historical paintings on the walls, depicting Father Damien de Veuster's first church, which had been built just a few kilometers south of there. Father Damien himself was also depicted wearing a white habit around his neck. Later, I learned that he was originally from Belgium. He'd spent 16 years caring for the sick in a leper colony on the nearby island of Molokai and became recognized as Saint Damien of Molokai. In fact, he was only the 10th person in the United States to be recognized as a saint by the Catholic Church. As I read about the remarkable service and care that he provided to the lepers, I felt utterly moved at his sacrifice, especially since he himself died of leprosy in 1889. The Painted Church had a remarkable history of its own, having been threatened by advancing lava flows more than once. And in 1990, the entire building had to be moved north when a lava flow overran Kalapana village. It was a miracle that the church had survived multiple earthquakes, tropical storms, and lava flows. And as we soaked in the beauty of the painted church, Johann told me about how some Hawaiians believed that Jesus' spirit had come to the islands long ago. Johann's words piqued my interest. "You know," he said as he admired the arching banners above us, held aloft by angels with golden wings. "Some people even believe that Jesus' bones were brought here to the islands. And the bones..." He abruptly stopped, and I looked over to him in surprise. I had been hanging on his every word. "What?" I asked. "What about the bones?" Johann remained silent. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "I should stop there," he said. "The person who told me this might not be happy about me talking about it. I probably already said too much." "Okay," I said. "Yeah, I don't want you to say anything you don't feel comfortable talking about." I swallowed and looked back outside, sensing a new tension in the room. "Are you okay?" I asked, turning back to him. He shook off the tension. "Yeah, I'm fine." "You want to go? I think we've seen everything." "Yeah, let's go." And as we walked out, I got the feeling that I would find out more about that story when, and if, I was ready. It would be years before I found out where the story originally came from, and was granted permission to share part of it in this book. The following day was a Wednesday, and I spent that morning packing a few things in my day pack before hitchhiking over to the four-way intersection that was the launching point for so many of my adventures that summer. When I had talked to Rob on the phone, I'd shared how much I wanted to go up to Mauna Kea, and he mentioned that a young woman named Rita was also couch surfing at his place that night. He said that perhaps she would be interested. After getting dropped off near the bayfront, I made the familiar trek farther into town to Rob's house. But when I arrived, Rita wasn't there, so I headed out to explore more and grab some food at the store. When I returned later that evening to make a quick dinner, I finally got to meet her. She was sweet and seemed almost as excited about Mauna Kea as I was, but she would have to check with the friends she was traveling with and see what they thought, and we agreed to talk more about it in the morning. Thursday was August 1st, the beginning of a month that would turn out to be a time of great endings and beginnings for me. That morning, Rita and I spent a light meal discussing our plans. She had checked with her friends. They would join us in a separate vehicle, but they were really excited too. It was really happening. We would drive to the top of Mauna Kea. "No, you won't, I'm afraid," Rob interjected. I turned to him. "Why not?" "Because Rita has a rental car," he said, "and no rental car company will insure a car past the Mauna Kea Visitor Center. You won't be able to get all the way to the top." I furrowed my eyebrows. "None of the rental companies?" He nodded. "The rule is specifically written into the contract of every rental car company on the island. And it's a really steep road to the top. You have to have a vehicle with four-wheel drive to make it up there safely." Crap. I took another bite of the pasta, reflecting on our options. Wait a minute. What if we hitchhiked the rest of the way? Rita pursed her lips. "Maybe. Have you done it before?" I laughed. "Done it? It's my primary means of transportation right now. People are friendly here, and they usually ask good questions. Sometimes I think they just want a good story, and I have plenty of stories to share. Anyway, they seem happy after they pick me up." She smiled. "Well, if you're so confident about it, I guess we can try. We'll see how much traffic is actually heading up there once we get to the visitor center." "Of course, but I think we've got a great shot." And so we took Route 200, known locally as the Saddle Road, up the mountain toward the visitor center, eventually making a sharp right turn onto the Mauna Kea access road. There was much less vegetation up there, and we passed large, dormant volcanic cones on our way in. After following a narrow, winding road, we finally reached a small complex of buildings and a parking lot that was flanked by two large mounds to either side. We got out and breathed the crisp, thin air. Her two friends were already there and met us at the parking lot. The only problem was the sun was setting, and I was all too familiar with how fast one could run out of daylight at just 19.5 degrees above the equator. I looked around, finding signs posted where the road continued upward to the summit. There was even a large speed bump to encourage drivers to really think about their choice before heading onward. Still, there were enough drivers heading up that I felt we had a good shot at hitching it. "Ready?" I asked her. "Okay, let's try it." At first, all four of us stood together, trying to hitch up as one group. But after a few minutes, I realized that the strategy needed some improvement. A single driver probably wouldn't have room for all four of us, so I suggested we split into two groups. Everyone agreed, and Rita and I stuck out our thumbs, ready to beam powerful smiles to oncoming drivers. I'm not sure if it was the fact that hitchhiking was outside of Rita's comfort zone, or that the thinness of the air was affecting our brains, but as we waited for a car to head up to the summit, we just started giggling to ourselves. This passed the time for a couple minutes until, to our relief, a huge pickup truck wheeled up to us and stopped. Inside, I could see a middle-aged couple. "Need a ride?" The woman smiled down to us. I smiled up to her in return. "Yes, we would love one. We've never been to the top before, and our two friends really want to see it. We only have rental cars, so—" "Oh, of course! Come on in!" Rita and I swung open the large black doors of the truck and slid in, her two friends running up behind us. Soon, all six of us were heading up to the top of Mauna Kea, the tallest point on the entire island, and I had trouble pulling my eyes away from the menagerie of colors that was growing in the sky. The clouds were bunched up like fluffy white pillows that stretched on forever, bathed in the ever-changing mango hues of the sunset. We took some sharp turns through narrow passes until I saw a strange shape in front of the clouds, a dark triangle, looming up from the horizon. Just as I made a mental note to ask about it later, we turned, and the steep rocks blocked it from my view. We turned again, and I saw a small island of rock poke above the layer of clouds, splashed orange and red by the setting sun. It would be close, but it looked like we would make it in time for the sunset. From this new perspective, I saw a winding road far below, the lower part of the access road we'd been on just a few minutes before, and beyond it was a vanilla sky. After another turn, a collection of white domes came into view, massive telescopes peppering the rocky landscape, and behind them, the mysterious triangular peak loomed once again, a perfect geometric shape rising up into the sky. And as the sun grew ever lower on the horizon, the colors grew deeper. In the distance, smaller rocky peaks poked up above the cloud layer, and it all felt like a scene from another planet. At last, our drivers found a parking lot and came to a gentle stop. "You guys just let us know when you're ready to go, okay?" the woman said, turning around. "We're up here to enjoy the sunset, too." "Sounds great. Thanks again. We really appreciate the ride." I zipped my jacket up part way and cracked the door open, freezing air blasting into my face. Yikes! Stepping down from the vehicle, I zipped my jacket up all the way and tried to find my footing on the cinder gravel. The air stung my lungs at first, but it had a strange, almost euphoric quality to it. I looked out and noticed a tall mound downslope from us that some people had climbed up to, lit afire by the setting sun. Beside it was the mysterious triangular peak once again. I stared at it for some time, marveling at its geometric perfection, almost as if someone had taken a protractor and made a dark triangle in the sky. And suddenly, I realized what it was. Of course, it was the shadow that Mauna Kea cast onto the clouds behind it. Only occurring during sunrise and sunset, this shadow was a perfect geometric wonder. And because of its vast size, it was easy to mistake it for another mountain in the distance, only much darker. As it dawned on me, I felt giddy at the thought that I was standing on one of the most remarkable mountains on the planet. At 4,207 meters above sea level, Mauna Kea is superb for astronomy and a rare sight to behold. In fact, when measured from the bottom of the ocean, Mauna Kea is over 10,000 meters tall, making it the tallest mountain on Earth, at least if one includes mountains that start on the ocean floor. For comparison, Mount Everest is 8,848 meters tall. I walked over to Rita, who was taking photos of the unending clouds that stretched off into the distance, and I pointed out how the nearby observatories appeared bright orange in the final light of day. I had seen photos of these telescopes on the internet, massive silver and white domes that peered deeply into the cosmos, but I never imagined I would actually get to stand so close to them. Maybe it was the cold, but a minute later I realized that I needed to use the restroom. Would they let me use one even if I wasn't an employee? I walked up to the nearest dome and pushed the door open, walking down a white-tiled hall. I ran into a woman wearing an ID tag and asked if there was a restroom I could use. She smiled and pointed down a hall to the right. Inside the observatory, it was easy to forget that I was at such great elevation, and I wished that I'd known in advance when we would have arrived. I might have scheduled a tour. Then again, such was the trade-off of hitchhiking. It may save money and provide flexibility, especially when rental cars are forbidden in certain places, but it can be tricky to plan around. When I got back outside, the sun was just a few degrees above the horizon, and farther down I saw a pair of almost identical white structures that I would later learn were the Keck Observatory domes, both of which are among the largest currently active astronomical telescopes on the planet. Rita asked me if I could take a picture of her in front of the sun before it finally set. I estimated that we had about a minute before that happened, so we'd have to be quick. Yes, definitely. I snapped a few photos of her, and she did the same for me, taking the photo just a few moments before the bottom edge of the sun's disk, which appeared paler up there, touched the pastel, cloudy horizon. Throughout all of these moments, we couldn't stop smiling. We had made it. We had taken a risk, and it had paid off. And I spent the rest of the sunset photographing the white disk of the sun as it sank below the silver-lined clouds. Once the sun had set, I found my attention drawn to the wealth of observatories all around me. I counted at least 6 or 7 huge white domes in varying sizes, most perched atop their own mound, looking out onto an unbroken sea of puffy, periwinkle clouds below. I turned around, and the generous couple who had driven us up there were strolling back over to their truck. Taking this as a signal, I followed them back over to where they'd parked. They were ready to go, and we felt similarly. They said the visitor center below usually did a guided star watch, and if we left soon, we would arrive in time. The drive down felt much longer, and after the freezing air of the summit, we all welcomed the warmth of the truck. Roughly a half hour later, we found ourselves back at the visitor center parking lot and got out, thanking the couple profusely for making our dream of reaching the summit come true. I looked over to the visitor center, my eyes drawn to a strange red light within. And when I stepped inside, I realized that every light source in the room was deep red, no doubt to preserve everyone's night vision for the star watch that would soon begin. Inside, I found every kind of astronomical gift one could think of. Shirts, posters, rotating discs that indicate what stars will be rising depending on the date and time, and much more. They even had freeze-dried astronaut ice cream. Eventually, people shuffled outside, and I followed them, noticing that some large telescopes had been set up in the sandy area between the visitor center and the road. A man introduced himself as Bergman and mentioned that he was part of the West Hawaii Astronomy Club. He pulled out a bright green laser pointer that seemed somehow familiar and pointed out some of the constellations above us. Surprisingly, the small laser was easily visible in the sky above, making a green dot that fluttered around the stars. Using the pointer, Bergman taught us about the Summer Triangle, a collection of 3 bright stars that are only easy to see in the summer. He also pointed out Ursa Major and several other prominent stars until he finally concluded his star tour and said that the telescopes were each aimed at an astronomical point of interest that was currently visible in the night sky. In moments, people formed long lines in front of the telescopes, which ranged from 1 to over 2 meters long. I got in one line, and after a short wait, I saw the brilliant yellow disk of Saturn, haloed in its thick, ancient rings. In fact, that night felt like a smorgasbord of astronomical delights. Next, I saw Messier 7, an open cluster of stars in the constellation of Scorpius. Although it's estimated to be over 900 light-years distant, its bright stars looked like shimmering specks of white sand floating in the blackness. They seemed oddly close, like I could reach out and touch them, if I only knew how. Yet, without a doubt, the most memorable object I saw that night was Messier 51, which is actually a full-blown spiral galaxy just like our own Milky Way. First catalogued by French astronomer Charles Messier in 1773, the galaxy has come to be known as the Whirlpool Galaxy and has become so famous that most people have seen at least one picture of it. Once my eye got focused on the object, I had trouble believing what I was seeing. There it was, an entire spiral galaxy, right in my field of vision. Being somewhat of an astronomy geek myself, I'd seen this galaxy in photos hundreds of times before, but to actually see it through a telescope was a rare honor. The astronomer directing that particular scope mentioned that it was so incredibly faint that the telescope was enhancing the brightness of the image somewhat, but it was indeed the Whirlpool Galaxy. Just as I'd seen in photos countless times before, it was attracting stars from the smaller galaxy to the right, what I later learned was called M51b. The man overseeing the telescope said that the galaxy was so distant he had to use the telescope's built-in computer to continually adjust its alignment to correct for the Earth's rotation. Since the galaxy is over 15 million light-years from Earth, it was easily the most distant object I've ever had the honor of seeing with my own eyes. Even after all that, there was still one final wonder that I saw before the night came to a close. I got in line for the one telescope I hadn't looked through yet, the largest of the 4 that had been set out. Of course, it was Bergman's. I didn't know it yet, but he'd pointed his huge machine at the grand finale of the night. "Are you familiar with the pillars of creation?" he asked when I reached the front of the line. I blinked. "You mean the star eggs? Where some stars are being born?" "I guess you could say that. Come, look." I pressed my left eye up to the soft rubber of the eyepiece and saw a strange hazy shape that I had trouble focusing on at first. "See the dark V-shaped object?" he asked. "Those are the pillars of creation." I squinted, just barely discerning the tall outlines of massive clouds that formed part of the Eagle Nebula. The color was muted compared to the photos I'd seen, but it was certainly the right shape. Within those immense pillars of gas and dust, I imagined the wealth of new stars forming, even in that moment, from the debris of ancient supernovae. At over 6,500 light-years from Earth, the sight of the pillars of creation was hauntingly beautiful. The dark inner portions of the nebulae forming a V-shape from our particular latitude, so distant that if I so much as breathed on the telescope, its image vibrated with my breath. That evening we left humbled by the ineffable beauty of the cosmos. And so ended the unforgettable week. It wouldn't be my last. The following week, Rita left the island, and I never saw her again. But by then I was getting used to it. Such were the ways of life when living on a tropical island.